Hey there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the Little Orthodox Escaping Atheism channel. As I am your host, as per usual, Max Kolbe. And tonight we had planned on talking a lot more about Jordan Peterson, but his issue was resolved. We're going to talk about that though, and the issue of online censorship in general, because it matters. And then what we're going to be doing tonight is we're going to be tearing apart. Actually, we're going to be tearing apart a 11-year-old article by Sam Harris because it's still relevant, strangely enough. Anyway, with me today, I say hi to him. His name is Todd. He runs the YouTube channel Praise of Folly. Say hello, Todd.
Hello. Thanks for having me on, Max.
Yeah, good to have you on. Todd, just so people know, he runs the Praise of Folly channel. He's got a few terrific videos taking on atheism. And the problems with it. Todd, for anybody who knows, is a Christian. He is a Mennonite, which is a specific subset. I don't even know if you guys technically even consider yourselves Protestant rather than your own thing, or do you more or less consider yourself Protestant? I can't remember.
Generally not, though we often get lumped in with Protestants, and we're not too picky about it, but...
Yeah, I mean, and what I mean by that is he's not Catholic at all. He's pretty far from it, or Eastern Orthodox or whatever. They're sort of their own line. I think most people would agree they sort of came out of Protestantism, but they were also kind of Protestant of the Protestants sort of thing, and very Bible-based, very good people, actually. I've known people in that whole circle of Amish, Mennonite. I've read up on the Hutterites. It's very interesting. It's very family-oriented and very community-oriented, right?
Oh, yeah, very much family community-oriented.
Yeah, which is very strong, and actually very admirable. It's something other people could look up to. So anyway, you know, let's go ahead. Now I'm going to mention this. You know, we do have disagreements, like Protestants and other types of Christians. We do. And sometimes we're even very open about that, or can even get into fights about it. But when push comes to shove, we see a lot of things alike, and there is a common enemy which we're all is worth fighting for. And I think, Todd, you said you see things the same way, that wherever you look, wherever you see cultural atheism, not necessarily this or that individual, you know, I don't think I did that much damage when I was an atheist, but when it becomes part of the culture, it becomes something really awful and very ideological.
Oh yeah, I mean, as Ben Franklin said, assuredly we all should all hang together, or we'll all hang separately.
Well, exactly. And right now, the secular order, I've noticed more and more people. Did you notice, Todd, how atheists actually stole the word secular?
Yeah, secular came from the Middle Ages and the secular clergy, which dealt with the more lay affairs of things, right?
Yeah, and I think that secularism developed out of Christendom more as a way mostly especially as a way for Protestants and Catholics not to get at each other's throats.
Well, exactly, yeah. Both Protestant and Catholics were involved in developing that idea in France in the 16th and 17th centuries.
Right, we're going to have freedom of religion, and we're not going to argue over those things we know we're just always going to argue over. It was something invented by Christians as a way for people to get along, and then it seems slowly over the course of my lifetime, I'm 51, to turn into, well, secular means no religion at all, so if you're an atheist, you are the default secular person.
Yeah, that's just silly.
Or you're going to defer to atheist judgment, because the atheist will bring his science, and his science and reason will vanquish us. And really, the people who created secularism had no plans for anything like that. They really didn't. And now it's become this thing. I've even had people say, "Are you pushing? You know, stop pushing your religious values on us." And I'm like, "Well, stop pushing your secular values on us, especially on our kids." Is that
well, exactly? I mean, one of the things you could say is, you know, I think it's a fair analogy. What happens in public schools with the secular atheist indoctrination is just the same as what happens in Iran or in Saudi Arabia when they have the Islamic schools. The only difference is they teach a different curriculum. And the atheists, I don't think, are able to abstract to see that.
I'm not sure what you mean by that, by the Islamic.
Well, I mean, they're madrasas, right? A madrasa is an Islamic school where they indoctrinate you into radical Islam, like in Saudi Arabia. And modern day secular schools are just secular madrasas, where they indoctrinate us into secular humanism.
They do. You know, you have to say they really do. I've talked about atheist indoctrination before. We had a whole hangout on it. We're probably going to have another one. I'm going to get Dr. Cy Gard, a biochemist, to come in here and talk about that, because he was indoctrinated as an atheist because he grew up with communist parents in New York in the 1960s. And those people are still around, a lot of them up in Canada now. And a lot of the way that they taught their kids has now made its way into universities and even some public schools. And a lot of schools in places like Canada, the UK, and I think Australia too. It's all coming in. I saw some of it coming into my own local school district. So this stuff is coming, and it is an ideology. They'll say it's a secular ideology, and they're right. It's a whole secular set of values supposedly based on science, and there's not a lot of science in a lot of their so-called science. So anyway, we've gotten a little off track. Because we mentioned Jordan Peterson going in, I want to tell everybody that, in case you hadn't heard, Jordan Peterson was briefly suspended on YouTube with no warning given, nothing. And that was earlier today. I and a few others were on that story when it happened, you know, over on Twitter. You can always find us on Twitter, at Max Kolbe Group or at Escaping Atheism. Right now, what I'm trying to do is bring up, I'm trying to do screen sharing, and I have stopped, and I have shared the wrong screen. That'll do it every time, won't it? There we go. Now I'm sharing the right screen, and I'm going to bring up Twitter. And there was a big, I mean, Glenn Reynolds from USA Today and others noted it. Jordan Peterson unexpectedly got his YouTube channel shut down for no reason. He was suspended. He was locked out. He could not get back in. He was given no reason. I'm showing on the screen now Dr. Peterson's YouTube account, Twitter account, and he says, my Gmail and YouTube account is back. Why was it shut down? Who knows? Why did they refuse to reinstate it? Who knows? Why did they turn it back on? Nobody knows. And it was clearly not a technical glitch, because he was, you know, he actually got the message saying, you know, your account is suspended. Just no reason given and no explanation given for the lift. When you see everything that's going on in YouTube land, Google land, Twitter land, Facebook land, you can tell there are certain voices that are just not welcome. And by the way, people who challenge ideological atheism are not very welcome. And I'm afraid that Jordan Peterson does that. Although, have you listened to much Jordan Peterson, Todd?
I've listened to some of his stuff. I'm not really a big fan of his Jungian archetypes for everything, but he does do good work in sort of giving a persuasive account of conservative values.
It's very strange when I listen to Jordan Peterson, because I listen to it and I'm like, he's a massive force for good, but you know, what I'll basically say, it's clear that he's talking to an audience that doesn't really believe in God or hasn't heard much God talk, because sometimes when I listen to him, I'm like, man, it took you 10 minutes to get there when I would have needed like 30 seconds. But that's because Jordan Peterson clearly believes in God in some way, and is trying to talk to people who like were raised not to believe in God. So it's just interesting listening to him. To be honest, since I do already believe in God and know there's a God, it's kind of hard for me to listen sometimes, but I really, really appreciate him, and I'm not surprised he's not liked. I want to also flash to people just something briefly on Vox Day's Twitter channel. He's got a video he's just put up warning people that you know, YouTube's bad. We already know that. Twitter's bad. We already know that. Facebook's already bad. We know that. People have been looking at an alternative to YouTube called VidMe. And what he and others are saying is that nope, VidMe is not safe. It's pure social justice. So Christians are going to get a very lukewarm reception. Religious people generally are going to get a lukewarm reception. And, you know, people who are not politically liked by the powers that be at VidMe also get ignored, get the cold shoulder. They've made it clear that you know, SJW, secular lefty types are far more welcome. So watch out if you're interested in VidMe as an alternative or an escape hatch to YouTube. It's not going to be one. And as of right now, we still don't have a good escape hatch, unless you want to start doing videos on your own server. And that's amazing to me. I don't know why we ever thought Google was going to stay free of this kind of sort of thing, but it's still great because you just can't know when you're going to be shut down or when you're going to be taken out.
Well, yeah, and what's so interesting about this is libertarians have been warning us correctly for decades of the fear of state-sponsored censorship, but the libertarians were totally blindsided by corporate censorship. And the left will say, oh, it's private property. They can censor whoever they want. And the libertarians get shut down because they got backed into this corner and they weren't prepared for this kind of end run of censorship.
Yeah, I'm an ex-libertarian, and I left libertarianism more than 10 years ago. And it was things like this that got me there. They refused to acknowledge that rich people, and especially big corporations, are capable of being very evil and exerting too much control. But as we're saying, they can be, and they are. In fact, they appear to be a bigger threat right now to free discourse, free inquiry, free flow of information than any government is.
At the moment, yeah. I mean, also, Lauren Southern got her Patreon shut down.
That's right. Lauren Southern got her Patreon shut down. Dude, I've talked to multiple Christians who've had their you know, due to harassment, false flagging, and no sympathy from YouTube, Google, or anyone else, had their channel shut down, have themselves crippled, and it's almost always ideological atheist activity that's doing it to them. Talked to so many it's happened to now, I've lost count. Accounts will just YouTube channels will just disappear for no reason and be gone. The account's gone, locked like it was with Jordan Peterson, only the whole channel's gone in some cases, and no explanation, and you never get it back.
Oh yeah, well there was a great channel I used to watch a few years ago by a guy named Old Dick Eastman, and he was like going to like this Cold War history, explain how communism had infiltrated the U.S. government and how the legacy of that was still affecting us today. And then one day, the channel was gone. And like he was reading stuff from like Whitaker Chambers, really like, you know, really awesome stuff, and then it's just gone.
Whitaker Chambers was a former communist who turned against the communists in the 1950s and exposed a number of spies, including a guy named Alger Hiss. So good catch there, remembering that name. I didn't think anybody knew Whitaker Chambers' name anymore.
Oh yeah. One of the interesting things is this is not quite censorship in the same way that Google was censored, but maybe about 10 odd years ago, when I was sort of a quasi-libertarian, I was posting on the Mises Institute forum, and somehow I was talking to somebody about some religious topics, some Christian topics, and my stuff stopped getting posted. And I complained to the guys and said, "Why is my comments not getting posted?" Then they started deleting my comments. And so what I did was I started contacting people that I knew were head libertarians and said, hey, do you guys approve of this kind of behavior? Because I was clearly being censored for saying things that had to do with religion and Christianity. And I got to the right person. You might know who Tom Woods is. And Tom Woods apparently got pretty upset. And then he sent an email to the guy that was running the website. And they said, oh, no, it's okay. And all my posts came back. But yeah.
Tom Woods, the guy who wrote, like, he's a sociologist, historian guy, right? He wrote How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization, a few things like that.
Mm-hmm. He was the guy that, he was the guy that came to my defense. I just contacted a bunch of, you know, chairmen at the Mises Institute and said, you guys don't approve of this, do you? And it was clearly based on the fact that I was doing something religious. And like these people talk about tyranny and like, yeah, you're pretty tyrannical on your servers. You just block people you don't like. So, you know, it's not nearly the same thing as using your Patreon or your YouTube channel, but, you know, it's just common, you know, you mentioned once before, Max, is that atheists, whether they're libertarian or Marxist or whatever, at the end of the day, they all circle the wagons against Christians. And it feels like that when you're talking to libertarians or whatever, the alt-right or Marxists, if they're atheist, they like each other more than you, even if you have more in common with them on social issues.
I have absolutely seen this. I've been saying it for a couple of years now. It actually tracks with my own development. When I was not religious at all, when I was kind of atheist, I went from socialist to libertarian. I never could make objectivism happen. I just could not could not handle objectivism. I thought it was too wacky, but I went socialist, libertarian, eventually couldn't find anything. I think you're going to find that really strongly. Atheists, it's a difficult thing for me to say too, because one of the things I've also found, even though I have atheist friends or have had them, is that now I really wasn't entirely like this when I was an atheist. I know I wasn't. I always went out of the way to have religious friends. But what I find circa 2017 especially is with atheists, the atheism always comes first. Before anything else they believe, the atheism comes first. And they will hang together for even when they disagree wildly on other things because they're atheists. So socialists and objectivists and libertarians will all have a good time together. And occasionally your guy who says, I'm not ideological, I just go by science, which is another way of saying you're an atheist who has no firm opinions of anything, except that you're atheist.
Yeah.
It's very observable, and if you're atheist and you're hearing this, and you're hanging out in atheist forums and on atheist YouTube channels, look around. Notice how you all talk about how smart you are and how independent thinking you are and how open-minded you are, even though you only hang out with atheists.
Well, basically what happens is you've seen a lot with the rise of the SJWs, which are just a separate brand of atheism. You've seen a lot of the sort of like new atheist types like Sam Harris, the late Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. They'll complain that, or like, I lost all my friends when I became a neocon or when I left the left. And I'm like, yeah, but you do that all the time when somebody stops being an atheist. And it's like you don't see the disconnect here, that you're complaining when they do it to you, but not when you do it to other people.
Yeah, in fact, atheists will often accuse you of shutting them out of the conversation when they never tried to be part of it in the first place. And that's one of the biggest problems. I frankly think that if you are a fan of any of the Four Horsemen, or of Penn Jillette for that matter, or Bill Maher, but especially if you're a fan of the Four Horsemen, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Penn Jillette, and no, not Penn Jillette, sorry, Sam, who did I miss? Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris.
Daniel Dennett.
Daniel Dennett, right. Dennett's probably the least bad in some ways, the least nasty. I don't know. They're all pretty bad. I mean, Dennett's actually done something as an AI researcher. He's not the hottest and greatest who ever lived, but he's actually done real work. None of those other three guys have ever done any real work, except maybe Richard Dawkins, who hasn't done anything meaningful and scientifically in at least 35, 40 years that I can tell.
Yeah.
And he never did that much in the first place. He is a glorified zoologist. They call it ethology, but it's just a subset of large animal zoology for the most part. He doesn't even get into microbiology and is in no way an expert in genetics. That's the funniest thing of all about Richard Dawkins. He's not an expert in genetics. He's really not. He knows as much as your average, maybe undergraduate studying biology.
Well, not only that, the evolutionist E.O. Wilson is actually quite critical of a lot of Dawkins' knee-jerk atheism.
E.O. Wilson's not the only one. My particular favorite, I've mentioned her before. I think even you would like her, Todd, even though you're a creationist, and I kind of, you know, I flinch a little sometimes at that, but you're allowed to be. But I think you'd like this lady anyway. Her name's Lynn Margulis. She was one of the few people who ever got elected to both the American Academy of Sciences and the Russian Academy of Sciences. And she just, in fact, she had a debate with Richard Dawkins back in 2012, a year or so before she died, where she just destroyed him. And she was a very atheistic, very much a scientific naturalist, and she had no use for selfish gene. It was really funny. At one point in the debate, she was kind of catty and she says, well, I really liked the selfish gene theory. And then she goes on to completely trash it as having no validity whatsoever.
Well, one of the best takedowns of the selfish gene was the late Australian atheist philosopher David Stove in his book Darwinist Fairy Tales.
We can come back and we should talk just about stupidity in evolution, or in so-called evolutionary theory. Even if you accept evolution completely, and I pretty much do, there is still so much dirty laundry in there. There's so much argument between evolutionary biologists. And I can tell you, almost nobody takes selfish gene seriously in biology. I've asked multiple biologists. Nobody sees any use to it. not useful in science, not useful for anything. Some will say it's a good way of popularizing the concept of evolution, but even then it's not, because it just gets too much wrong. And that's an ongoing problem. One of the things I can tell people happened, and I'm going to pull this interview up that I've done before. I'm going to recommend it again. I can't recommend it often enough. I'm going to pull my screen sharing up, and then really we're going to get to Sam Harris. I swear we're going to get to Sam Harris, because we're going to take apart Sam Harris real good. But I am going to recommend again this interview I did and the book regarding it, an interview with Borden Painter. And he is one of the world's most prestigious historians. I'm not kidding. So you look for this on YouTube, Borden Painter on Atheist Denial of History. He's one of the most distinguished historians in the world, and I'm not making that up. Former president of Trinity College, former dean of the faculty there, I believe, has an endowed chair in his own name. And he's been published in some of the most prestigious history journals in the world. And he documents how all four of the original New Four Horsemen, including Sam Harris, use each other to engage in phony scholarship. In other words, one will make a claim or two or three claims with dodgy sources. So like maybe Christopher Hitchens would do this, and then Sam Harris would cite Hitchens. Or Richard Dawkins would do this and would cite Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, and they're all bogus claims. The whole new atheist mythos runs around lying about history and lying about science quite often, and backing each other up so it looks like there's no refutation of what they're saying. It's pretty seedy and nasty. And I point it out to people whenever I can. Painter's not the only one to call him out either. Painter's not the only one.
One guy that I think you would really enjoy to have on discussing this particular topic of atheist lies about history is the honest atheist Tim O'Neill. He spends a lot of time blasting people like Richard Carrier for the just completely ludicrous accounts of history, because he wants to be honest, and that's respectable.
It is respectable. I think I've seen him before. Shoot me a note to that when you get a minute, and I'll make sure to put a link in the low bar to the video we're doing here today so people can go look for him. I believe I've seen him.
Oh, yeah, I'll do that.
I've been reading that, and the guy and going, yes, and wanting to applaud and cheer because he was just being honest, and that's all he was doing, and just pointing out all sorts of BS that flies around now in atheism. And I talk to other atheists like that. We've even got atheists who hang out with us sometimes and laugh and find what we're doing amusing, because they agree. There's just so much stupid in atheist land. And much of it's come up in the last 10 years since these Four Horsemen came out. All right, we've been banging our gums long enough. I'm going to flash Sam Harris onto the screen. And this comes from edge.org. I haven't spent much time on edge.org. But are you seeing this, Todd?
Let me see here. Yeah, there we go. Sam Harris.
There it is, Sam Harris. Now, this is, of course, an 11-year-old article almost. And you might be asking, why are we bothering? It's so old. Sam's moved on. He's done other things. It's like, no, he really hasn't. He no longer self-identifies publicly as an atheist, but he's still obviously an atheist and still gets stuff wrong about religion and other things all the time. And these talking points he gives, there are 10 supposed myths about atheism, and I hear these talking points all the time in the culture now. So it doesn't matter if Sam Harris has changed his opinion on any of them. He hasn't done much to correct any of them, that's for sure.
Well, it's not even that. It's not even that. There are many non-atheists, like, liberal types that are maybe like spiritual but not religious, that believe the same thing.
Exactly. And although I think spiritual but not religious people, if you look into it, they tend to accept, all these atheistic assumptions. And
Exactly.
I've actually read that the people who call themselves spiritual, not religious, these days have a tendency toward the same kind of issues like depression and other things that are very clinically common among atheists. I think it's because they're accepting the materialist atheist worldview while claiming to be spiritual in some vague sense they can't specify.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember when I was an atheist, I used to try to think I had spiritual thoughts, but it was like very vague and malformed, like somehow in the electromagnetic spectrum, our spirits may continue sort of thoughts when I was an atheist, because I was a materialist and I couldn't think how else would you do things. And I'm not a materialist anymore. Becoming not a materialist was like having a belt come off my brain. I don't know if you ever stuck in materialism, Todd, but I was, and it was really a very cramped and narrow worldview.
Oh, no, I never was, but yeah, it is. You can just tell by some of the stuff we're going to read here tonight.
Yeah, it just squishes your brain. It's kind of what it felt like. It literally felt like I'd been wearing this really tight belt, and when I gave up on materialism, it was like the belt cut loose. I was like, oh, I can think freely again. Or for the first time in some ways.
Well, basically what you're talking about, there was this great skit, well, not skit, but this great scene from Fulton Sheen, where he said that the atheist mind was like the Soviet Union. No ideas came in. It just blocked out all outside ideas.
See, now I was always looking for new ideas. It's probably why I eventually busted out of it, right? But I do see that. This wicked reductionist thinking, this idea that they already know all they need to know, and that everything can be explained using the laws of science and the tools of science. And what they always mean, of course, is materialist science, too. Although they get really into economics. Have you noticed that?
Oh, they love economics, capitalism, communism. They argue about that all the time.
Well, they're economic materialists, and I think that is directly the one directly leads to the other. Because somehow, even though they only believe in the material, they do believe the so-called delusion of money. They'll say it isn't real, but it works anyway, and it's some kind of way of tricking humans. It's a very, but they all do. A lot of them get into economic materialism. They go socialist or they go libertarian. Anyway, let's go on. Let's just take these points one at a time. I don't know if we're going to get through all of them, but if we don't get through all of them, we can come back another time and finish, because these are such common atheist talking points. Number one, Sam Harris says it's a myth that atheists believe that life is meaningless. Is it? Tell me, Todd, has it been your observation that atheists don't think life is meaningless?
Oh, yeah. See, what they'll say, and he says even here, is that the universe as a whole might be meaningless, but we ain't meaning in our own lives. That's just a basic fallacy. If every part of the whole has a property, then the whole has that property. So if every part is meaningless, then the whole has to be meaningless as well.
Yeah, and that would be the philosophical way of putting it, and correct. My friend Christopher Lansdowne over at Missing the Mark, you can check out his channel if you want. It's pretty good. He just points out, he dispatches this in one sentence, because the atheist will say, I give my own meaning to life. And, you know, Christopher's response is, you know, when you give your own meaning to life, it stops existing the minute you stop believing in it. In fact, one of the things I've seen over and over again with atheists, and I even had this my experience myself, you get faith in an idea or a group or a person or a set of persons, and then your faith is shattered. And the longer you stay atheist and the more it goes on, the more that happens to you. People betray you, people let you down, you become disillusioned, you become jaded. It happens over and over again. Because
yeah.
You think you can apply meaning, you can, basically what I think we would both agree, they're putting these ideas or these people where God's supposed to go.
Well, exactly. It's like what Augustine said in the beginning of the Confessions. Man only finds rest in you because there's a God-sized hole in our hearts and only God can fill. And trying to fill with anything else doesn't work.
I've been talking about Augustine a lot lately, but in any case, yeah, see, here's the bottom line. My casual observation and my what we can see about atheist attitudes. Atheists really do run high on depression and suicide. You can find references on that in multiple places if you just get out of the atheist bubble of all the atheist forums and listening to your favorite atheist heroes. There's a high link between suicide, depression, chemical dependency, alcoholism, all of that tends to run high in atheists. And they used to acknowledge that at one time. They would say that it was the religious persecution that was driving them to be depressed, suicidal, drug, alcohol obsessed, etc. I don't think they have that excuse anymore. And it's still an ongoing problem.
Well,
Even
actually, I was just going to say they never did, because with the collapse of the Soviet Union, with all the spike in alcoholism, there was no religious oppression in Soviet Russia. It went the other way. You had all these atheist Russians when the Soviet Union collapses. What do? They go to alcoholism and all these antisocial behaviors.
Yeah, they do. And yes, we do have science on that. Anybody who wants to see the science can let us know. I'm not going to be sitting up here throwing reference after reference up it's right now, but there's a lot of science on this. And the only people who refute that science are ideological atheists in their atheist books and their atheist forums and their so-called skeptic forums where they supposedly debunk these things. But if you go and look, the numbers don't lie. The numbers don't lie. Atheists are generally very unhappy people. And they generally do. They run high into sexually. What am I trying to say? I don't want to say it rudely, but
sexually
really,
harmful behavior.
Sexually harmful behavior. There you go. Sexually harmful, sexually destructive behavior. There you go. Unhealthy sexual behaviors. And they run high in drug use. They run high in alcoholism. Almost every atheist I've ever met is on some kind of psychoactive drug he got from his doctor. It's just remarkable that you can see this. And the smart ones, I think, will actually say, yes, I accept that life is meaningless. But the less smart ones will always be finding some cause or person to champion, and that cause or person always lets them down. So I'm sorry, it's not a myth. Atheists do believe life is meaningless, or they believe, my life has much meaning because I have assigned X, Y, and Z to it, but they won't admit. Yeah, and as soon as you stop believing in that thing, you'll be shattered in delusion and life will seem empty again. Just like that. So, sorry, Sam, it's not a myth. Shall we move on to number 2?
Sounds good.
Number 2 is a big fat lie, Sam. Sam is just, oh my God, Sam, you are such a liar. It says, atheism is responsible for the greatest crimes in human history, which it arguably is. But to just say that it's a myth, no. You can say that it's a questionable assertion, maybe. But as for it being a myth, it's not a myth. What do you think, Todd?
Well, yeah. I mean, really, what it boils down to is the no true Scotsman fallacy, right? No true atheist, no true reasonable person would do this. Ergo, they're not reasonable people, or they're not atheists. Now, he points out that these people replaced religion with the state or with man. But all atheists do that. All atheists, either whether they're libertarians or Marxists, replace God with either man or the state. So, I mean, even Sam Harris does that. There's this great video where Noam Chomsky criticizes the new atheists, and he said that they replaced God with the state, and that it's extremely dangerous because this is in the context of the war on terror, which, of course, Chomsky opposed. And so, okay, if you can't actually define atheism as not doing one of those two substitutions, because everybody does it.
Yeah, and Noam Chomsky himself is an atheist, I believe. And whether you like him or hate him, or you think he's insightful or not, I think the atheism very clearly shows in his thinking, because he seems to know only how to criticize things, which, by the way, I've noticed is an atheist trait. Only knowing how to criticize things.
Yeah. The other thing is with
hard for him.
The other thing is with Marxism. I mean, it's explicitly atheist. Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin all explicitly state that the Marxist theory is not just it's the rejection of idealism and the acceptance of philosophical naturalism, which is atheism 101.
It really is. I mean, there's exceptions here and there, but they're as rare as hen's teeth, as the old saying goes. I'm even going to shout out Hitler. Now, of course, I have a joke. We and others have a joke meme running around saying, Hitler invented the atheist religion and Richard Dawkins is his prophet and all that. Now, that's obviously humor. But I see a lot of atheists even trying to deny Hitler was an atheist. And What I would say there is that by modern definitions used by the likes of the new atheists, including Sam Harris in this very article, Hitler was an atheist. He hated Christians as well as Jews. He had some admiration, some for the Muslim faith, but not a lot. And he pretty much substituted either himself or the German nation or the German people for God. In fact, I like to say Hitler had the holy trinity of himself, the German state, the Nazi state, and the Volk, the German people. It was its own weird trinity, okay, but it was all based in scientific naturalism. He called it scientific socialism. He did. That's what the Nazis were all about, science and progress. They used those words constantly, just like they also wanted to get rid of primitive religious superstition.
Oh yeah, and when it comes to oh, I forgot what I was going to say. Go ahead.
Well, they killed countless, not just Catholics, but countless Lutherans. Even though I don't really consider them Christian, they killed Jehovah's Witnesses. In addition to Jews, and of course the religious Jews were the first and most easily targeted. I mean, they eventually had this racial eugenics theory where any Jewish blood would taint you, but they went after the religious Jews first.
Yeah, I remember now. The on the alt-right, most modern-day National Socialists are atheist.
You will find if you look at most social justice leftists are atheists, and you will find that if you look at the hardcore nationalists, not every nationalist, but certainly the hardcore nationalists, way overrepresented by atheists, ton of atheists, and some of the most harsh and extreme so-called race realists, obvious atheists. Even people like Richard Spencer, the most prominent white nationalist right now, is quite contemptuous of Christianity. He doesn't hate it. But I've run into other white nationalists who are like, really, Christianity is the enemy. I had one tell me that literally that Christianity is what's destroyed Europe. And, he said, we need to get rid of you people. And I'm like, yeah, don't tell me he's not an atheist. Don't tell me these people aren't atheists. Yes, they are. They believe there's no divine authority. They believe truth is found only in science. And by science, they mean their personal theories of science.
Oh, yeah, there's a joke. They believe in Wotan, will of the Aryan nation.
Yeah, okay, which is like reading tea leaves and economic forecasts for everything, right?
Yeah.
All right, shall we move on to another one of the so-called myths?
Yep.
Number 3, atheism is dogmatic. Sam Harris says atheism is not dogmatic, that's a myth.
Oh, wow.
Sam, I'm going to let Todd talk here because I just want to explode. I have never met more closed-minded, dogmatic, doctrinaire, willfully ignorant thinkers in my life than the average atheist circa 2017. And not just the average atheist. I look at you, Sam Harris, and I come to the same conclusion. What do you think, Todd?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the dogmas of philosophical naturalism, empiricism, the science is the only method to know the truth, which is weird because history isn't scientific, but they still believe in history. So kind of doesn't work out there. But yeah, this sort of like knee-jerk materialism, everything is reducible to the material components of which it's made of, sort of a materialist reductionism. The sort of crass empiricism, which is long since debunked. They'll often say, well, give me proof for God, and by proof, they mean some sort of empirical test, kind of like a verificationism or like an A.J. Ayres style thing. Even A.J. Ayres rejected his own epistemology because it's absurd. It contradicts itself. Hume had the famous statement, if it's, paraphrasing it, if it's not mathematical or analytic,
But
then
you can't say it. Go ahead.
Yeah, the statement is meaningless and should be cast to the flames. But the statement itself is not analytic or geometric or mathematical. And it's just like, it's an epic fail right here. But yeah, they'll never budge. There's that great debate twice. William Lane Craig debated Peter Atkin. And twice Peter Atkin said, there is no philosophical presuppositions in science. And it's just like, you just want to like facepalm. But that is dogma. That is like straight up dogma right there.
It is straight up dogma, ludicrous dogma that can't sustain itself. Faith has no place in science. Garbage. You cannot do science without faith. It cannot be done. Literally, it can't be. You may not have to believe in God, but you have to have faith in things you can never scientifically prove to do science itself.
Well,
You
it's you brought up the point about having faith in God and science. I mean, that's why the Soviets, I mean, they declared war on science. I mean, they said that cybernetics was a bourgeois science and suppressed it. And we're all familiar with the bogus biology of Lysenko. I mean, it's
right.
just it's a train wreck. I mean, atheist science doesn't work. The United States is still the most religious nation in the first world. And not only that, if atheism is so pro-science, right? Why isn't North Korea and China the beacons of scientific progress?
Well, and actually, it turns out if you look at surveys of scientists in places like China, where atheism is the official ruling ideology, and you can't even get into political positions if you don't profess atheism. Yes, you have to profess atheism to get into the party, at least into leadership and government positions.
No, but atheism is denial of belief. It's a denial of belief, Max. It's not anything positive. It's just we just don't believe what your God is.
Right. No, they have all kinds of beliefs, and they do enforce it. But my point is, even there, it's nominal, but it's a majority of scientists in China express theistic beliefs, either the general God concept or other spiritual beliefs. And a lot of physicists these days are spiritual, and that's probably because of all the findings in quantum mechanics. that just make a materialist worldview really hard to sustain.
Oh yeah. Well, what's interesting is how like a pantheist like Deepak Chopra has been using that to sort of like undermine the materialist foundations of the atheist ideology.
Yeah, the bottom line is atheism, especially today, is nailed down to scientific naturalism. And just in case, just I've said it many times, but I'll say it again: scientific naturalism isn't science. It's not. It's never been science. Scientific naturalism is a philosophy of science, and a very limited one. And I would say easily the majority of the most influential scientists who ever lived, even in the last century, were not scientific naturalists and were not atheists either. That includes Einstein, that includes Heisenberg, that includes Schrodinger, that includes, I mean, go back to Newton and so many others, Louis Pasteur. I mean, scientific naturalism is just a theology. It's a philosophy. It's a philosophy of science. It's easily shown that it's got flaws and limitations and assumptions that don't work. And it's like these people who are atheists. They are. If you call yourself a scientific naturalist, you're fundamentally an atheist. Maybe you profess agnosticism, but you're an atheist because scientific naturalism is very atheistic. It's bound into materialism, which is almost entirely atheistic, and it misses a lot of stuff that's in science. But atheists are very dogmatic in holding to scientific naturalism, and they're dogmatically in holding to their idea that you can use science to explain everything. And just like you said, they'll acknowledge history, but history isn't science. They'll acknowledge the idea. They'll tend to acknowledge the idea of rights, at least legal rights. But even then, they acknowledge legal principles, even though you can't do science. You can't use science to make laws. I mean, you can use science to influence your laws, but you can't scientifically describe the U.S. Constitution.
Or you can't scientifically describe what right and wrong is.
You can't scientifically, yeah, right. You can't. There's too much you can't define by science, yet atheists today will routinely speak of science like it's a god that has all the answers.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we move on to the next myth?
Yep.
All right. This myth is supposedly that atheists think everything in the universe arose by chance. I'm going to make the picture bigger in case people out there want to see it. He says it's a myth that thinks that it's a myth that atheists think everything in the universe arose by chance. And then he starts out with this whopper of a sentence: no one knows why the universe came into being. Well, we do. But okay. In fact, he's saying, I'm just going to read this because this is such a mouthful. Yeah. In fact, it's not entirely clear that we can coherently speak about the beginning or creation of the universe at all, as these ideas invoke the concept of time, and here we are talking about the origin of space-time itself, which does not debunk the myth at all. You're just talking. And he says, the notion that atheists believe that everything was created by chance is also regularly thrown up as a criticism of Darwinian evolution. And as Richard Dawkins explains in his marvelous book, The God Delusion, this represents another misunderstanding of evolutionary theory. Sam, that is all gobbledygook.
It makes no sense. What is he talking about?
Yeah, but basically they're both trying to get away from the fact that they both believe in a random causeless universe. They obviously do. Harris believes this.
Oh, yeah, Neo-Darwinian orthodoxy is clear. There is no direction to the universe.
He is trying to debunk it, and he doesn't even successfully, literally he's just making a word salad here. I know atheists like to say word salad, but this is word salad.
I mean, there's really not much to say because he didn't say much himself.
It's all, yeah, he ties himself into knots here, like saying, we don't believe it's all by chance because Darwin arrived at the phrase natural selection by analogy. It is like evolution is but there it is. Evolution is a combination of chance mutation and natural selection, which means essentially you believe it's all random. By the way, also the notion that random mutation and natural selection can explain life's diversity is easily debunked. No, it can't. Mutation is not how evolution works. Nobody believes that anymore. They believe it can happen, but even talk to people who know genetics, they're like, yeah, mutation, very rare, usually dysfunctional, frequently kills. I mean, basically, it's not enough. There's other forces, and people like what was it? Did you say his name was
E.O. Wilson was one, yeah.
And Lynn Margulis is another one. Like
another good one is the guy that wrote "Why Neo-Darwinism Was Almost Certainly False." Thomas Nagel. He's a philosopher, but he covered some of those weaknesses as well. The cracks are showing, and it's harder and harder to hide it.
It really is. Neo-Darwinism is going down. Scientific naturalism is going down. It is only a matter of time. Nobody believes in these things who's really looked hard at them. And Sam Harris says it's a myth that atheists think everything in the universe arose by chance. But when he explains why not, he just explains again that he thinks everything happens by chance. It's ridiculous. I don't know why anybody takes Sam Harris seriously.
I know, it's hilarious.
All right, next one. This has to be the most offensive one of all to me because I love science and I always have. And he says it's a myth to say that atheism has no connection to science. So he's suggesting this is I'm just going to read this again. And Sam, you're such a horrible, hateful liar. He says, although it is possible to be a scientist and still believe in God, as some scientists seem to manage it, there is no question that an engagement with scientific thinking tends to erode rather than support religious faith. Horseshit. Only when guys like you imply that there's a big conflict in the first place. That's how I see it.
Well, I mean, look at who was the guy that wrote "There Is a God." He changed his mind based on the science.
A ton of people change their minds based on the science. Check here on the check over on the Escaping Atheism channel. Look for my interviews with biologists named Sy Gart, S-Y, Sy as in S-Y. I think it stands for Seymour, but he goes by Sy Gart, G-A-R-T-E. He's a biochemist, actually. Came to believe there was a God while studying science. Sarah Salviander, an astrophysicist I've interviewed a couple of times, also came to believe in God while discovering science. And what many others have said is that even if they grew up atheist, which a lot of them do now because kids are raised that way commonly now, when you start studying science, you start to see evidence of God all over the place. Where you see it, but that requires you to understand God like an adult does. And what most people who believe in God, you'll find exceptions, but what most people believe in God, even just the broad philosophical concept, is God's the thing running reality. God's making it all go, right? God's in charge of everything, every atom, every quark, every quasar, every star system. God's running all of it. God controls all of it. He can do anything he wants with it. Like we're in a video game simulation is one way of putting it. I don't know how you like that theologically, Todd, but it seems to match what most people I talk to think.
Yeah, I mean, didn't Elon Musk do a talk where he said we all live in a video game simulation?
Yes, he did. In fact, he invested in research on it, him and the Bank of America and some other unnamed billionaires. They believe we're running in what amounts to a video game simulation.
They believe in the Matrix.
Yes. In fact, even Neil Tyson came out and said, yes, he believes it too, that appears to be what the science is currently showing, that we're living in the equivalent of the Matrix. Now, this is what theological people have been saying for thousands of years. They haven't used the word matrix or simulation. But
yeah, basically we're living in something that's been programmed by somebody else. And of course, somebody else is God who wrote the program.
And who's also executing the code, I would say.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, that's the big thing. This is one of the theories I have, and I'll push it at you, Todd, because I push it at everybody I know. I think one of the dialectics that's been established, parts of the narrative that's been established, it's a way of a sort of like an almost autistic way to, focus people's thinking in the wrong way. It's something that bothers me all the time when I see it. They concentrate on the origins question as if, the moment of creation is where it all matters, and then, like pool balls, like God took out his cue and smacked the white ball and sent the balls all scattered and then walked away, and now the universe is operating itself. That's a real primitive way of looking at things. I think it's sort of the deist, pantheist position. But when you're just looking at that origin point, you're missing the point. The idea is that God's here now all the time, making sure everything keeps going the way it's going. He's running those laws of physics. He's running the laws of probability, You
see, people forget when Newton wrote the Principia Mathematica, that's exactly what he said God was doing. God was constantly, he said that God was maintaining. See, that famous quip where Napoleon talks to that French mathematician, says, "There is no God in your calculations." Napoleon was referring to Newton, because Newton argued that God would wind up the machine, right? You have a machine, it breaks down, you need someone to step in to wind it back up again.
Yeah, but that's not what Newton thought, right?
Well, no. Newton thought that the universe was maintained by God. He didn't think he just made it and let it go. God would repeatedly come back in to maintain it the way that you or I would maintain another machine.
Yeah, I don't think he even needs to maintain it, though. I mean, I think he's running it all in real time myself. But but and outside of time too. But oh man, that will be here forever.
One of the things, though,
that forever, and not even just Christians, not even Christians by a long shot. It's not specifically a Christian idea.
Yeah. Well, this point 5, one thing that is just so beautiful. This is to refute this totally. This is the from Religion and the Natural Science by Max Planck. And the atheists, they're just going to have their heads spin when they hear this. Under these conditions, it is no wonder the movement of atheists, which declares religion to be just a deliberate illusion, invented by power-seeking priests.
Hey, Todd,
yeah.
Breaking up. Check your mic and start over.
Okay, can you hear me now?
You're breaking up. I hope that clears.
Oh, wow. No, I don't know what's going on. Let's see here.
Might want to disconnect and reconnect. I'll keep talking for a minute.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. The claim atheism has no connection to science. But what Sam is suggesting here is that atheism does have a connection to science, and in reality, atheism has no connection to science whatsoever. Atheists are not responsible for the bulk of science that's been done, even the last few decades. They bring up Stephen Hawking, but if you look at a list of Nobel laureates, if you look at surveys of working scientists, I'm sorry, but there's no connection. And if anything, I've spoken especially to a lot of young researchers, but some others too, who are older, will be like, the scientific naturalists, the atheists, are bullies. I've had more than one scientist or science student say they're bullies, and they make stuff up they can't back up. They make scientific claims they can't back up, and they treat you like garbage if you reject their dogmatic beliefs within scientific naturalism.
So can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. So what was it you were about to say?
Oh, yeah. Something that Max Planck said that really just kind of blows this whole out of the water. Under these conditions, it is no wonder that the movement of atheists, which declares religion to be just a deliberate illusion invented by power-seeking priests, and which for the pious believe in a higher power nothing but words of mockery, eagerly make use of progressive scientific knowledge, and in a presumed unity with it, expand in an ever faster pace its disintegrating action on all nations of the earth and on all social levels. I do not need to explain in any more detail that after its victory, not only the most precious treasures of our culture would vanish, but which is even worse, also any prospects at a better future. This is Max Planck, Religion and the Natural Sciences.
And that's Max Planck. When did he die? Early to mid 20th century? Max Planck is
Yeah.
one of the most important physicists who ever lived.
He died in 47. Yeah.
1947. Okay, yeah. He noted just how bad the atheism was back then.
I know, back then.
Schrodinger was, I think, kind of Schrodinger's cat fame, was kind of a pantheist, I think you'd call him, but definitely no atheist. Einstein was very shy on the God question, but he considered atheism silly. He really didn't like it at all. And I happen to know toward the end of his life, he completely surrendered, and I think he embraced idealism. Because quantum mechanics, I can find the quote if anybody needs me to, but it was toward the end of his life, and Einstein basically surrendered, and he said, you know, the idealist position makes sense, quantum mechanics makes sense. He was reluctant to it, but he did. None of the great scientists were. They keep holding up Stephen Hawking, but guys, look through the list of Nobel laureates in science even today. I don't think you're going to find Hawking's name on it. Why is he so popular?
He's a popularizer. He's really good at communicating directly to the people.
Yeah, so far as I can see, he hasn't done any serious science work in quite some time. And his recent pronouncements on God are just wild speculation at best and personal opinion. They have no scientific basis at all. So the fact that he's an atheist is interesting, but it doesn't make him more scientific. It just doesn't.
No,
so I have to say again, atheism has no connection to science. Well, that is actually true in a lot of ways. The greatest scientists frequently are not atheists at all, and atheists have been known to get in the way of science. They are capable of good science. I think they're not real good at theoretical physics, though, and I think that requires an imagination the average atheist doesn't have. All right, should we move on? We've got about 10 minutes here. Okay. All right, supposed myth. Sam Harris says it's a myth to say that atheists are arrogant. And you know what I'm going to say to that?
I know. Wait, we got to read this. When scientists don't know something, like why the universe came into being or how the first molecules, self-replicating molecules formed, they admit it. Pretending to know things the one doesn't know is a profound liability in science. Oh my gosh.
Oh my God.
I mean, that kind of just answers itself. I mean, I think we've all met atheists in our lives that say plenty of things when they have no idea what they're talking about, and they just refuse to admit they don't know.
Shallow, condescending, narcissistic, hypersensitive. These are words that come to so many atheists, that apply so well to so many atheists, even including Sam Harris himself, who is a titanically arrogant man, who talks out his ass all the time about things he doesn't know. And what's really, he's suggesting that religious people don't admit when they don't know something. And yet what I find all the time is atheists admit all the time, or religious people, Christian or not, admit to not knowing things all the time, theologically, scientifically, or otherwise.
Oh yeah, because for religious people, specifically, and even more specifically to Christians, humility is a virtue, and part of that is epistemic humility, knowing what you don't know.
Yeah, in fact, one of the central Christian ideas that I've always heard is that some things we'll never know because we're not capable of understanding them.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. But it's the atheist that thinks you can have a theory of everything that can explain the entire universe and everything in it.
Yeah, in fact, some of them are still looking for that somehow, the holy grail of atheism, the universal theory of everything that explains everything. They think they can get it all down to one set of math equations that everything spins out from that. And there's just no evidence for that.
Well, you'll hear atheists say that we've explained everything except dark matter and dark energy, which make up like 90% of the universe.
They think they know everything, and they think everything can be explained in their scientific naturalist materialist philosophy, and it's garbage. Yes, Sam, atheists are arrogant, and you are exhibit A. That's what I would say.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, should we move on to number 7?
Yep, number 7.
All right, atheists are closed to spiritual experience. He says that's a myth. He wants us to believe atheists are spiritual. I happen to know he's been studying atheistic Buddhism, and that he supposedly gets his spirituality out meditating that way. By the way, Sam, are you aware, as an atheist Buddhist, that the Chinese government under Mao and others tortured and killed millions of Buddhists who believed either in something very close to what we would call the philosophical idea of God? And the Buddhists certainly believed in spirits, spirit forces, and spoke frequently of gods, and they didn't mean it euphemistically. They meant it really.
Oh, yeah.
Millions of them, I mean, they were tortured, sometimes brutally in the public square. They'd be taken out, and like male monks would be forced to rape nuns, and then they'd be tortured some more. And then it was horrible. Millions of very religious, spiritual Buddhists who believed in spirit forces, and at least something like what we would call God, and they got massacred and wiped out and their beliefs suppressed. And then this atheistic Buddhism came in that the Chinese government approves of because it's officially atheist. That's what you're practicing, Sam.
Well, the other thing is, if you look at the actual paragraph, he kind of he's kind of another word salad. He talks about first that atheists can have spiritual experiences, and then argues if Christians have spiritual experiences, what does it prove? But that's not the point of debunking myth 7. We're not talking about the veridical truth of Christian faith experiences. It's a total red herring. It's just like...
Yes, and he's comparing the spiritual to love, ecstasy, rapture, and awe. Well, those are emotions that Christians tend to also think have a very spiritual basis, especially things like love and awe. I'm not sure about ecstasy and rapture, but we can argue about that another time. But we believe the spiritual is things that are not subject to the laws of physics. Do you believe, Sam, that there's anything that's not subject to the laws of physics? The spiritual is usually assumed to operate completely independent or outside of them, or only converge with the physical, with nature, now and then. And people I know have had spiritual experiences. You'd call them psychological aberrations, without evidence, by the way, or without proof. You'd call them psychological aberrations of meeting spirits, of having very deep spiritual encounters, of having precognitions, and all that, and you have no scientific basis to just say none of that's real. You can say some of it can be shown to be psychological aberration. You can show some of it to be chance happenstance, but you definitely can't show it all to be. I've had experiences, and I've talked to other people who've had experiences, and like, you're not going to get away with calling that random chance and psychological wish fulfillment.
No, you
can't. Herring. Some of what I've gone through, not everything, not every time you get all happy and joyful in church is God directly doing something, but well, it might be. All right, we're almost done here. We're also running a little low on time, though. Let's see if we can just get these wrapped up.
Yeah, let's just knock them out.
8, atheists believe there is nothing beyond human life and human understanding. He says that's a myth. Well, actually, I don't think I have anything to say there, because I've never said that atheists believe that. I don't know anybody who says atheists believe there's nothing beyond human life and human understanding. Well, they do tend to assume nothing is beyond their understanding.
They do assume the theory of everything. The theory of everything kind of directly contradicts his rebuttal. Yeah,
their quest for the theory of everything to explain everything scientifically. Yeah, I'm sorry, that's more word salad. Sam, you're not even making sense. How about number 9? Atheists ignore the fact that religion is extremely beneficial to society. Yes, Sam, you do ignore it. You ignore it and you lie about it. They lie about it constantly.
Gallup did a poll that said that people that are in the United States that were religious believers, Christians and Mormons and Jews, were overall happier and healthier than their atheist counterparts. And that never made like the front lines, but it should have. It was in, Gallup showed it.
People who regularly attend religious services and report being a believer are happier. They tend to live longer. They tend to have more stable families. They tend to have more stable careers. Religious people built the entire structure on which modern science rests and continue to contribute to it mightily. Contrary to myths that Sam Harris and others put out, atheists and the non-religious are more likely to go to jail, not less. No. In fact, Sam, your whole career has been dedicated to lying about religion and religious people. It just has been. And then finally, number 10, he says it's a myth that atheism provides no basis for morality, and he gives this classic line: if a person doesn't already understand that cruelty is wrong, he won't discover this by reading the Bible or the Quran. And then he says some nasty stuff about bad stuff in various...
Well, except that's what does happen. I mean, how many prison ministries where these hardened killers who are total sociopaths... there's this one account, I remember there was a member of the Khmer Rouge. He was a camp commandant and a brutal torturer. And he was witness with the gospel. He totally changed everything. And I'm like, obviously, being a sociopath, he didn't think cruelty was wrong.
That's interesting, too. The guy that runs Act 17 Apologetics here on YouTube, I saw his conversion story, and he said he was diagnosed as a sociopath and that he actually really hurt, I believe it was his father, and almost, but didn't, but almost killed him, and then found God, and then found Christ, and it changed everything for him.
Well,
that stuff happens.
Well, the other thing is atheists actually accept this. Max Stirner and Friedrich Nietzsche and Marquis de Sade all admit that there is no basis for morality, and that's great. You know, you're liberated. You're free from the shackles of bourgeois morality.
That's right. And every atheist I've ever talked to, I want to hear an exception. I've yet to meet an exception. Pans the idea that there is ultimate right and wrong, pans the idea that there are any real morals, and says that morality is subjective, a matter of opinion, and socially enforced or socially derived. All of which says basically you don't believe in morals. Because if you believe in morals, you believe something higher than your rational thought or than human rational thought is setting what's right and wrong. And, you know, you can argue, but you don't get to say what's right and wrong. Right and wrong is right and wrong whether you believe it or not. That's an inherently theistic worldview. Atheism doesn't provide any basis for morality. And if you were honest, Sam, you'd admit that most atheists don't believe in morals and even scoff at the idea.
Well, yeah. I mean, if to say that it's socially conditioned is just a genetic fallacy, it doesn't prove anything.
And I haven't seen where Sam Harris or any of his acolytes have changed in the last 10 years. I just hear these talking points all the time out of atheists. They're 11 years old and they could have easily been, they're bullshit now. They were bullshit when he wrote them. They're bullshit now. They were bullshit 50, 100, 200, 500, 1,000. They've always been bullshit. Every one of these so-called myths of atheism is true of atheism. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Most definitely.
It's just weird reading this kind of agitprop, because what he seems to do is, in what I would call very Penn Jillette-like fashion, it's what I call verbal misdirection. You know, in each and every case, he says, when he names a myth, and in debunking it, all he's really doing is crapping on religious people, and he's not otherwise debunking anything. He's just trying to make it out that religion is worse somehow than his random, causeless, amoral, you know, meaningless worldview. And this is what you get.
They have to resort to word games because they don't actually have any evidence to back their claims up.
They do have to resort to word games. In fact, they have resorted to word games. Have you seen all the rage now in atheist land is something called street epistemology? And it's nothing but using word games to... Oh,
wait, is that Peter Boghossian?
I think he started it.
Man, yeah.
Aaron Ra, the atheist cult recruiter, and a whole bunch of atheists now. You'll see them all over social media too. They're using street epistemology, and it's playing word games, basically to change the subject or worm around ever getting to a central point. Atheists are slippery and won't let their presumptions be challenged. They just always play word games until they can get back to find a way of phrasing things until they can get back to being right and everybody else is wrong.
Yeah.
It's amazing to watch. And we do need to be closing here, but I think this is something Todd and I would agree on. These attitudes are easily describable. They're easily observable in the group that calls itself atheist, and most of them are observable in casual conversation with any of them. Sam Harris included. Sam
Oh,
Harris
yeah.
personifies most of the things he says are myths. And this is what gets to me. This is seeped into the popular culture, which is, I think, what it always was, because there were smart people calling bullshit on Sam Harris and co. from the beginning. They weren't getting any press. And now it's gotten into the popular culture, and people think this is wisdom. And they believe this stuff, and it's just garbage. Yeah. And at some level, it becomes a threat to everybody who won't be atheist with them, because they feel entitled to talk down to anybody who won't be atheist with them. They feel free to treat anybody who won't be atheist as mentally impaired. And it's socially, it's a disaster, I think.
Well, didn't Dennett or Harris talk about rounding Christians up and putting them in zoos?
He did. Well, he said he kept assuming that religion would go away, which is a common Marxist trope going back to the 19th century, that nobody's religious anymore. The smart people have all given it up. Eventually, everyone will be atheist.
Yeah.
That goes back to at least the 19th century, and it's always been garbage. Dennett eventually withdrew by the way, because he had seen too much data that said he was wrong. Religion's not going away. God's not going away, ever. Even in China, where it's enforced, and believing in God screws you, can get you badly screwed, and everybody's afraid if they're religious to admit it. Something like a third of Chinese admit to being religious anyway, and Christianity is exploding in China.
Mm-hmm.
I think by last count, there are now estimated to be 70 million Christians in China as of this year, and they're still growing like wildfire. And the government over there is going back and forth whether to tolerate it or repress it, or tolerate it or repress it, because even they are starting to figure out that no matter what they do, no matter how hard they try, no matter how they educate people, people turn out religious anyway. They just do.
We're born to be that way. It's, that's the problem.
Yeah, as I like to say, especially because it frustrates them, but it's so true. It's very obvious if you believe in evolution and look at the evolutionary record. It's very clear humans evolved to need the spiritual and to seek it.
Well, it's funny. I don't think it was E.O. Wilson, but there was this atheist evolutionary biologist who argued that evolution selects against atheists because they don't have children and don't reproduce. And
it does. It does. You can see it even now. Atheists are the least likely to have children. They're the least likely to get married. They're least likely to have children. If they do, they're more likely to have abortions. If they do have kids, they tend to have fewer kids. They're more likely to sterilize themselves, and they don't live as long. Exactly. Evolution obviously is selecting against them.
That's the funny thing. That's the funny thing, right? I mean,
yeah. And regardless of where you are on evolution, we all know, heredity happens. Atheists, you don't reproduce. I'm sure you'll get them out there. I know there's one YouTuber who calls herself Godless Mom. She seems not too bad, but I'm a little worried about her kids. Because atheism is not a way to raise a kid either. If you look into it, I've mentioned this many times, but there's substantial research showing it's natural for children to develop a sense of God and the spiritual on their own without prompting, frequently before they have any language. It's just so. And so you can either decide that's a delusion they were born with, or maybe they evolved a capacity to need it because the spiritual is real. Well, any chance that that's true?
Well, this whole idea that religious people are a delusion. Well, let's say somebody thinks he's Napoleon Bonaparte or Jesus Christ. Almost everybody's going to admit he's delusional, and they're going to act in very antisocial ways that are irrational. Whereas religious people act very rationally and in very sociable ways. It's not even remotely similar to an actual delusion in any medical sense.
No, it can't be medically called a delusion at all. It's a belief that you don't share, and that's all religious belief is. So
back to war games.
No kidding. All right, we had some fun here. We also ran a little long. Why don't we start wrapping up? I want to remind everybody, please give us a like, please give us a subscribe. We do need your support on PayPal. Our tip jar is on escapingatheism.com. We're trying to upgrade to a new server right now and open a new blog. Anything else you want to say before we go, Todd?
No, just thanks for having me on, Max. It was a very fun, engaging conversation.
I had a great time. I hope you come back. Everybody, please be sure also to go subscribe to Praise of Folly and say hi to Todd. All right, everybody, have a good evening and God bless.